So next, you do a comprehensive competitive analysis. So before you get into the market, you want to find a space within the market. So you want to study your competition, know what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are. So you basically do a SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis is the strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat analysis. So you want to find out the strength of your competition, what they are good at. Like, so in our example, our main competition will probably be the real Airbnb, right? So you study what they do also. For example, they could have a good product. Maybe you have a very fast product that works very well. Maybe they have good customer service. So the kind of information you want to know. Then you also study their weakness. So you want to find out why Airbnb didn't succeed as well, maybe in Africa. So you can find out what to do better. So you can know what areas to focus on in order to give you a competitive edge. Then you look for opportunities and threats. So for opportunities, you can find, okay, based on our analysis, we have an opportunity to maybe create something with local languages, for instance, so that the users in Africa will feel more comfortable using our products than the competition. That's just an example. So you want to look for opportunities based on the analysis. Then you also look for threats. So like, what could potentially be the issues with going about, what could potentially be the issue? So the barriers to success. So what could threaten your market dominance over time? So maybe you look into like the ability, for instance, for your competition to maybe adapt to, or maybe copy your design and all that. So you want to identify all competitions. So you're not going to only analyze one competition, you'll analyze all possible competitions in this stage. So for example, you could also analyze local rental agencies. Maybe if there's a local rental agency, you can analyze that as well. You could analyze the pricing. So you could, study the pricing methodologies and study if you can afford to maybe lowball them. So like offer a lower price. You could look for gaps in the market to make sure that, okay, you can fill in the gap. So basically the general idea of this stage is that you want to find the white space in the markets where you can fit in so that you'll be able to dominate that space. Then when you're done with this, in the conventional methodology, at this stage, you then come up with the detailed product planning. So you want to make sure that you dot every I and cross every T, and every aspect of the production process is detailedly planned so that there are no mistakes and you're able to come up with the perfect product, right? The idea is that you want to reduce the possibility for errors so that your image as a company is not tarnished. So in this stage, you create comprehensive product requirement documents. So these are like, what you think the product is required. Then you create detailed wireframes. So for an app product, you'll probably work with Figma to create detailed wireframes and detailed aspects of the UI, the user interface, and maybe even the backend and the different tools you need in details. You come up with technical specifications to know what kind of metrics you must meet as the right person. Then you do all that kinds of planning. You also do like a milestone and timeline. So you want to make sure that the product is produced in a timely manner, so that you don't disappoint your customers. So you can easily tell them what to expect. Then you also want to do like resource allocation. So you want to make sure that you have enough resources to go through the entire process. So for each milestone, for each timeline, for each part of the production process, you'll make sure they have all the resources they need to create the perfect product before you move on to the next stage. And then in this stage, you now implement your plan. So you get all the guys you hired, let's say for the tech product, the Airbnb, you get all the software developers, you give them the plan, and then you pay them well, make sure they have all the resources they need, and you get them to start working on it. And obviously, you kind of be on them to deliver on time because you need the product to be perfect. And then as they are developing, you make sure that every milestone is hit at the right time. And then you do an extensive Q&A testing to make sure that the product is actually perfect and there are no errors in the product. Then You also do user acceptance testing. So before you actually release the product, you'll get a bunch of users to actually use the product and make sure there are no bugs in the case of tech products. And if there are any issues, you correct them before the launch dates. So you now try to optimize things. So you can try to optimize the efficiency, maybe the memory efficiency, the time efficiency, so that the product isn't so slow. And every metric is optimized as much as possible. Then obviously you focus on bug fixing and refinement at this stage so that the product is as perfect as possible. Then finally, we get to the ground launch stage. So you want to make sure that everyone hears about the product as much people as possible. So you'll probably have to hire a marketing team and hire a lot of advertisement agencies to advertise the product. Maybe you can have a launch party, a grand launch party, invite, like, for our example, you could invite Channels, Arise, different news stations around Africa, and maybe even the world, to make sure that everyone hears about it. Make sure there's a lot of PR around it. Make sure you do a lot of sales. The idea is to go big or go home, so that you don't waste your time. You instead focus on making sure everyone hears about it and everyone knows about how good the product is. And hopefully, after you do all this, then you're guaranteed success. That's basically the idea of this conventional method. So before I go on, does anyone know what the issues with this approach could be? Is there anyone that could share what they think the issues with this approach, conventional approach, could be? Anyone? All right, I'll just move on then. So for me, the issue for this approach is, I guess it's kind of obvious. So, as you probably know, 90% of startups fail, right? Kind of good to just get into this game, get into this business and succeed right away. We don't expect that for any other thing. So for example, if you're learning a language, we don't expect you to speak it the first time you try. We expect you to practice over time and get better gradually. But for some reason, people expect things to be different when it comes to startup. The truth is that it takes time for you to get all the skills you need to build a successful startup, right? And this approach doesn't allow you or give you the opportunity in general to build the skills, because you kind of focus all your resource in the first attempt, right? So you spend a lot of resource, you don't have enough experience. So I'm going to go through in detail why this might be a problem, different specific reasons why this might be a problem. So the first reason is analysis paralysis. So this approach, this conventional approach, tends to encourage endless research without action. They spend many months researching, getting information. So in the case of our African Airbnb, we went to different countries, we got data from different kinds of people. But the problem with this is that the data might contradict. So what people might want in Nigeria might be different from what people want in Kenya or what people want in South Africa. So because of this, you might be overwhelmed and you might not know what direction to take because you're getting conflicting messages. And then because you're spending so much time analyzing and trying to get the perfect solution, you haven't really trained yourself to take action. So you might get comfortable with doing nothing for a very long time, right? Then, and as a result, it might also create an opportunity cost. So during the time you're researching and, preparing for the perfect product, a new competition might come in and take your market share. So because as you know, in this economy, in this current global system, right, the market tends to be very dynamic, especially in the tech space. So if you waste a lot of time doing a lot of analysis, right, someone might just come in and take your market share. So in the tech world, for instance, 1 month can be equivalent to 10 years in other fields. So that might cause some problems. And like I said before, information overload. You might get overwhelmed with the amount of information you get from all the analysis you do, and that might cost you or reduce your ability to have the impact you want or to get the results you want. So another problem we have is building in a vacuum. So as a new founder, right, it's not ideal for you to build in a vacuum because you're building based on what you think is right and not what people actually want. So yes, you did a lot of research, you did market analysis, competitive analysis, but what you'll find out is that what people say is often different from what they actually want, right? So people might say, for instance, in our example, that they prefer going to hotels or going on expensive vacation. But but in reality, they might not necessarily want to do it. They might like it in theory, but in reality, they might not have the money or the time to do certain things. So they might actually prefer a more cheaper approach. So you don't get real high quality data, which I believe is the data you get from user behavior. Like people tend to say, action speaks better than words. So the problem with this approach is that you get lower quality data from your analysis, and you don't get the chance to measure real user data, right, in the first stage. And then by the time you get real user data, you've already spent most of your resources. So that's another thing. So, and as a result, by the time you get the information and maybe you want to pivot, you might not want to because you already made a huge investment building a vacuum. So you didn't really talk with your customer much. You only talk to them a few times. So you might not get all the information you need, and that might cause some problems for you. Another problem is that you might build a lot of features, very expensive features that no one wants. So for example, in our Airbnb app, maybe you might build like a user interface. You might hire some software engineers to build very expensive UI elements that no one actually uses. So for instance, in Instagram didn't actually start out as Instagram. It started out as a more Facebook-like app, but because they didn't necessarily use this approach, they quickly found out that people were more interested in photos than other aspects like messaging or other aspects of a social media app. So they decided to focus more on the photo aspect, and that's why they were able to get their market share. But with this approach, if they use this approach, they wouldn't have found out because they wouldn't get real user data, and maybe they'll get it when it's too late. So they might not have the resource to pivot. So another problem, like I said, is the resource depletion. So if you spend, let's say, 70% on the first stage, creating the first product, you find out that people don't really like the product and you want to pivot, maybe change it or start again. You might not have the resources, like both time and money, for instance, or even energy to make the necessary pivot. And even if you pivot, you might not create something that is high quality, right? So most of your budget is spent in the first attempt, and then you don't have the energy to go again because you've spent everything. Maybe you've spent all your money or all your time and you have to go back to your job or something. Then, and because of this, it might make you inflexible. So you might have the sunken cost fallacy. I don't know if people know what that is. So basically, it's a fallacy in which because you've already spent so much, you just want to carry on. So because of this, you're more likely to be biased because even if you find out that there is a feature that you produce that is not as useful, you might want to just stick to it because you've already spent so much energy on it. Or even worse, you might not even have any resources left for iteration. So you might just have to stick to this. And because of the lack of flexibility, it might lead to failure and it might cause you not to be as successful as you'd hope. So what is a better approach? Does anyone have an idea of what a better approach could potentially be? Is there anyone? I don't know if people have an idea. Okay, yeah, 𝐓𝐤𝐿, please. let us know.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Best suggestion would be like to use the agile methodology
Okay.
when you want to go into the market. Yeah, you just analyze the problem you want to solve, and then pick it one after the other. Like not like waiting till you get everything in perspective. Like you could pick it one after the other, and then like deploy test, and then see how the user interacts with it and all of those things. And then you keep moving like that until you like build out everything that you want to do. So
all right. Thank you very much.
Though.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's
okay.
That's very similar to the idea I have in mind. So yeah, the agile methodology. Yeah, so the agile methodology is a well-known methodology in computer science that kind of makes you focus on getting user feedback while developing, like similar to the test-driven development process in software engineering. So yeah, that's basically the idea I have in mind, although mine is a little bit different. But so my idea is the learning first approach. So the conventional method is more of a planning first approach because you're trying to you're prioritizing creating the perfect product. But in my more practical methodology, right, the aim is not necessarily to create the perfect product, but the aim is to learn, right? And then the first approach is kind of similar. It also involves using the agile methodology. But I've discovered that the agile methodology can also be used with the planning first method. So I guess this methodology focuses on the learning aspect, right? So if your goal is to learn, then you use that goal to determine how you go about creating the product. So I'll break down the learning first methodology into 5 steps. So the first step is quick problem identification. So you don't spend too much time identifying like, or maybe you have a problem in mind that you want to solve, but instead you want to get the real problems from people. And then the next is hypothesis formation. So a hypothesis is basically an idea of how to solve a problem. So you have a well-defined problem in stage 1, and then you come up with hypothesis on how you solve the problem. So the next is the minimum viable testing. So rather than creating a minimum viable product, which might be what people think about, now you create a minimum viable testing, which might not necessarily be a product. It's just a way of testing if your hypothesis is correct, right? And then this process has fast learning cycles. So basically, this will go in stages. It goes in cycles, right? Like you repeat the process over and over again. And while repeating the process, you iterate and you gradually get better and improve the product. But after each stage or each cycle, you get user feedback and then use the user feedback to go back and improve the product. So that's the general overview of the learning first methodology. So I'll go over each stage in more detail right now. So the first stage is problem discovery. So you talk to multiple potential users over a fixed period of time. Make sure you focus on getting their pain points, not solutions. So you're not focused on what solutions they want or what solutions you think they'll need or what solutions you think you need. You're focusing on getting their real problems. So like in the case of the African Airbnb, you could talk to like Airbnb users and find out what issues they have with Airbnb rather than focusing on what they want. So people are less likely to, what you want might be different. What people say might be different with what they actually want, right? People might say one thing but mean another thing. So the best way to find out what people really want is by finding out what they don't want. That's what I've discovered. So you focus on their pain points, not necessarily solutions at this stage. And then you document. So you create falsifiable problems, right? So the problem you have has to be falsifiable. So for example, you say Airbnb takes a long time to respond, right? So that's a falsifiable problem. That means you can test if the problem has been solved or not. So if you say, for instance, oh, this app is not beautiful, it's not falsifiable because there's no real way to define beauty. It's not really specific enough. But if it's more like a falsifiable statement, it can be tested against, and that's more useful. And those are the kind of problems you want to get from people at this stage. So in this next stage, you now create a solution hypothesis. So this is simple. If we solve, it goes in this format. If we solve X with Y, then Z will happen. For example, in our African Airbnb, right, we could find out that, okay, most Africans, let's say, don't have a mobile phone. So if we create a website, more people will use our product rather than an iPhone. So that would be the hypothesis. So you can see the hypothesis is testable. So rather than saying more people, you could say, okay, within 1 week, 50 people will use our product if we do this, if we create a website rather than an app, right? So you have defined the problem very well, and then you can easily test against it. So you give it a specific time, and you have like specific user metrics you want to test against. Then, based on this hypothesis, you now mock up a simple solution, not necessarily a prototype, but like simple sketches, something that you understand, or something like maybe a video, a simple presentation, something that won't take you too long to create, because the point of this stage is that you just want to create something that is quick to test. Then you want to define the metrics upfront. So like I said, you want something that is falsifiable, something that can be easily verified without much bias and much speculation. So the aim is to create testable hypotheses with clear success criteria. So in the next stage, you then do the MVP, which is the minimum viable testing. So you build a small prototype, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a prototype. It can be like, let's say, a video, or it can be like maybe in this age of vibe coding, you could just vibe code something quick. You don't necessarily want to have a perfect product. You just want to have a product that users can respond to so that you can get the data. So, for example, in the case of our hypothesis, where we said, okay, maybe the problem with Airbnb is that they don't have a website. I'm not saying they actually don't. I'm just giving an example. So you could say, okay, we're going to create a very quick, we could vibe code a quick website and put it out there and see how people respond to it. Maybe we'll also create an app on the side so we can compare and contrast. All right. So you put it out there and see how users respond. You measure like the user engagement, maybe use time, the amount of time you spent using it, for instance. So those are the kind of data you want to get at this time. And then you test against your hypothesis. So the earlier hypothesis you came up with in the previous stage, you test against established metrics to see if your hypothesis is correct, right? If your hypothesis is correct, then you move on, right? You keep iterating. If it's not correct, don't be afraid to start again, because you don't want to waste time working on something that people don't want to use, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not about how good the product or how good you think the product is how good people think it is. So you test with things like I said before, click rates, for instance, in websites, watch time. For example, in YouTube, there's something called watch time. So you measure the amount of time people actually use. Another good way to test is based on payment. So if people pay, that's the best way to know if they're actually interested. People could say they're interested, but they're not willing to pay for it. But people are willing to pay, maybe pay for pre-order a product, for instance. That might be the best way to know that, okay, people are actually interested in this. And then you can now move forward. And a lot of successful companies actually did this. For example, Microsoft, they actually kind of pitched their products to different companies before they actually made it. So famously, Bill Gates went to IBM and offered the Microsoft OS to them before he actually made it. And he already signed a deal with them before he spent 1 week making it. Of course, it might not necessarily work, but I find that this is a lot better. People are more likely to forgive you if it's a lot better to ask for forgiveness than to not even have the users in the first place. And also another good thing is that once you know that users are there, then you're more likely to actually, work very quickly and get the product you need. So like I said, in this stage, You go through this process over and over again, but obviously as time goes on, yeah, exactly. Thank you. It's not how good the product is, it's how good people think it is. That's very true. So it's not what you think, it's not based on your opinion. It's based on what the users think at the end of the day, because we are serving the users, not ourselves. So you keep going through this process, but obviously as time goes on, you kind of create a more usable product. So as you get to the later stages of this process or the iteration, as you get more data, then you can now focus on working on the fundamentals and improving the quality, making sure the product is has high quality. You optimize the different metrics, and as time goes on, the product should increase. So the benefit of this is that along the way, you keep getting user data, measuring user data, and then you can use that data to make high quality decisions about your product. And I believe that increases your chances of success as time goes on. So of course, there are always caveats to everything. Like there's no perfect solution. So we're going to talk about different situations where this alternative approach might not necessarily be the best. So you might want to use the more traditional approach in these cases. So the first caveat is if you're working on hardware product with high manufacturing costs. So if you're working on something that is very expensive, maybe to manufacture, for example, if you're building like a car or something or a phone, then you probably want to use the manufacturing approach. You can add some aspects of this process in the design stage, for instance, but in the manufacturing stage, you definitely want to use a more traditional approach because you don't want to, but the cost of iterating can really add up since you're manufacturing. But in the design stage, you could probably apply this approach. Then if you're working in regulated industries, like for example, in the pharmaceutical industries or in civil engineering, obviously you don't want to use this method because you don't want to be experimenting with people's lives, for instance, or you don't want to just put a bad or super product out there in regulated industries. So basically, you only want to use this method in industries where the cost of failure is low. So, for example, in a lot of tech industries, if you're making a game, for instance, if you're making like a product that doesn't necessarily affect those lives directly, then this approach might be the best. But if you're working in regulated industries, it might not necessarily be the best approach. Then if you're working in enterprises with long sales cycle, right? Then you probably don't want to use this approach because the main benefit of this approach is that you get user feedback regularly. But if you're in an enterprise with long sales cycles, that means you're not going to get user feedback very consistently. So it might be more beneficial to just stick with the more traditional approach in those cases. Or you can maybe create a scenario where you get more feedback in another way. But like I said before, sales is probably the best way to test the user engagement. So if people are willing to buy something, that's probably the highest quality user metric you can get. Then if you're working in fields with high R&D investment, so if you're working let's say if you're building a spacecraft or maybe something that requires high expertise and it's not something that is cheap to come about. So it's similar to the first point, right? If the cost of iterating is so high, it might not be worth it. So it might just be better sticking to the traditional approach. And obviously in this kind of industries, you probably need to have more experience, right? To actually succeed in this kind of industry. So it probably doesn't apply to most of you, but I'm just putting this out there in case there are any of you might be interested in this kind of industries. So also if you're working in mission critical systems where failure isn't an option. So like I said before, you only want to use this methodology in industries where failure is not an option, because this approach relies on the ability to fail. So in the tech, we say something, move fast and break things. But if your industry doesn't allow you to move fast and break things, then you probably don't want to use this approach. So finally, as time goes on, as you gain more experience, right, as you get a proven track record, then it might be a waste of time to use this experience. It might still be useful to some degree, but at some point it might be better to just use the more traditional approach so that you don't waste time iterating when you already know what to do pretty much. So this approach basically is better for beginners. But as time goes on, as you gain more experience, then you might then transition more to the traditional approach because it might be faster and more efficient for you at that stage. So I'm also going to talk about common pitfalls to avoid when using this iterative approach. So try to avoid testing with friends and family because they are likely to give you biased feedback. So if you're testing with your friends, they might not want to tell you the truth about your product. They might just lie to you or so that they don't hurt your feelings. But you want to test with your acquaintances, people who don't really know you personally, because they are more likely to give you the truth. Also, give people the impression that you're not offended by the truth. So if you feel like you'll be angry if you tell them the truth if they tell you the truth about your product, then they might not be as comfortable as sharing the truth to you. So make sure you work hard to give people the impression that you have no problem with telling them the truth. Then also avoid falling in love with your first solution. So remember, this is about the process, not the answer, right? If you follow the right process, then you're more likely to succeed. But if you fall in love with the answer, right, like you get attached to the idea you have in your head, maybe like you had a dream from childhood that you want to do this, but then you find out that, the methodology you wanted to use might not necessarily be the best. But because you're so attached to it, you might just stick to it. So try to avoid being sentimental or attached to different methodologies and be very flexible. It's very important to be flexible in order to actually succeed, unless you might be part of the 90% statistics. Then, like I said before, make sure you don't avoid negative feedback, especially before validating value proposition. So in fact, I'll advise that you actively look out for negative feedback. So you should go to different people, like tell them to actually critique. In the tech industry, we have something called bounty hunters. So we basically pay people to try to critique or break our products. So try to do the same, and you're more likely to succeed. So try to avoid building complex features before you are sure that people actually want it. So like I said, even if you want to build a feature, make sure you don't build something too sophisticated. Just build something simple that people can validate, so that you can get their feedback as soon as possible. Then also avoid confusing user interest with user commitment. So like I said before, what people say might be different with what they actually do, right? So listen more to what they do than what they say. Action speaks louder than words, and this very much applies in the startup world. So make sure you focus more on what people do, not what they say, and use that high quality data. All right, so this is a very important aspect that people should keep in mind. So when developing, people tend to be overly focused on, success, whatever success means to them. So they focus on doing one thing, for instance. But a lot of times, the best way to actually succeed is by, trying out different things, helping people, learning from people. So especially as a beginner, make sure put in effort, make a conscious effort to actually go out of your way to help people, because a lot of times the best way to learn, right, is by working with people, maybe getting a mentor, collaborating with people. Don't be afraid to collaborate with people. Don't be afraid to speak to people about your ideas, because a lot of times, I find that a lot of new founders are like scared of speaking to people about their ideas or helping people because they see everyone as their competition. But the truth is that ideas are very cheap, right? It's very hard to actually implement ideas, right? Ideas are a dime a dozen. So you lose more by not working with people or speaking to people than you could potentially lose by sharing your ideas with people. So make sure you share even with your supposed competition, because you can learn by helping people. You can get new ideas, and you can use that to improve your business, right? Don't forget about the big picture as well. The reason why we do all this is to help people. So we're not doing this just to get a nice product. We're doing this to help people. So if your product is not helping people, then it's kind of pointless. So focus on helping people, focus on helping your community, and in the process, you're more likely to succeed, I find. Finally, the two approaches I mentioned are actually valid approaches, right? The traditional conventional method is a valid approach to creating products. Also, the iterative or agile methodology is also a valid method. But I find that for beginners, especially, the iterative approach, the learning first approach is the best because it allows you to build experience and also get information you need gradually. So like when you're a child, right, you go through an educational process, and the educational process takes you through different steps, different milestones that teaches you along the way. So this learning first approach will gradually train you and increases the probability of you succeeding. So the core idea is that you should validate the problem before building the solution, right? Make sure that you validate the problem, especially as a beginner, before you build the solution. Then make sure you talk to customers consistently, not just in the research phase. So at every step of the way, make sure you're consistently talking with customers. Then make sure you build a minimum viable test, especially in the initial stage. Make sure you're not building a very sophisticated product. You just build something small. Might not even be a product. It could be like a survey. It could be like, a simple prototype at first. Then as time goes on, you can now build the product you have in mind or the product you get. Make sure you measure behavior, not opinions, because actions speak louder than words, basically. And be prepared to be very flexible. So make sure you are not attached to your solutions, and make sure you are able to pivot if you get contrary information. Make sure you're very flexible. In fact, like the truth that over the step of the way, you're probably going to have to restart multiple times. Well, you have to keep in mind that every failure is not actually a failure because you learn. I think it was Thomas Edison that said that I didn't fail to build a light bulb 999 times. I just learned 999 ways not to build an electric bulb. So keep that in mind. It's very important that you are flexible when it comes to this. So thank you very much, anyone. Are there any questions about the presentation? I'll be happy to answer them right now. All right. Thank you. So, yeah, if there are no questions, thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that session, Okafor. So I don't think we can go through all that and not have a question. Please, let's speak up, please. If you have a question or if you not have to have that brief session where you have to brainstorm and come up with your question, let's ask questions. Does anybody have an idea that you want to implement and you want to ask a direct question on how to go about it, tools to use, kind of relationships, anything that can relate or you can connect to this conversation? All right.
Okay, Victoria, you have a question. Yeah, you can ask. Sorry, you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for this session. I really learned a lot. I would like to ask that, okay, I've been in this space where I'm trying to look out for the like my own part of like a selling point for me for around like my products, my business that I run. And it's been like a mental block for me so far, because I really don't know how do I get to know, okay, these are things that can make me stand out? What are the process? How do I go about it? Is it like, do I need to like conduct a survey? But even if I want to conduct a survey, like what are the questions I need to ask? Like I just need a something that would make me break out of this mental block.
Okay. So like I said in the presentation, the best data you can get is user data. So if there's a way people can validate your product by maybe paying for it, or by, if it's a tech product, if you can get like user engagement data, like watch time or click rates, things of that nature, that might be the best. But if you're not able to do that, then yeah, maybe like user surveys from strangers, especially. So if you're validating with people you already know, they might not necessarily tell you the truth, but if you could like join, like, let's say a group of strangers, maybe acquaintances, people don't really know, and then ask for a honest feedback on the product. And then based on that, you can now pivot or, continue working on what you're working on. So that's what I'd advise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so from my end, I have a few persons with me. So someone has a question from there. So the person is next to speak.
Okay, I'm Boma. I want to know how you can meet, you have an idea, and then you need to meet sincere people, not just people that when you give them your ideas, they steal it. How do you come up with that? How do you go about it?
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, there's always a risk in this, right? So life, you can never really be sure of anything, right? There's always a risk that someone could steal your idea. But I'll argue that there's a greater risk in failing if you don't trust people. So you're less likely to succeed. Like the risk of failure is much greater if you don't work with people than if you work with them. So that's something to keep in mind. So I think there's a passage that says, one will chase 1,000, two will chase 10,000. So I guess you can test people by like giving them some information and seeing what they do with it, right? Like, don't give them everything at once. Just give them in phases. Like, for example, if I want to test someone with my money, if they are going to handle my money well, I give them like, let's say 10% and see what they do with it. If they don't handle that 10% well, then I know that they're not going to handle the rest well. So you can start small and then gradually increase. Just the same idea of the iterative process. You start small with people, give them some information and see what they do with it. And if they are trustworthy with the small information, then you can give them more as time goes on. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, not a question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, appreciate.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, apart from competitors, what other risks should we prepare for? Yeah, there's a risk of, let's say, the act of God, that's what they call it. So like, some unforeseen circumstances could happen. So I'll say to, like, for example, like if you're working in the tech industry, maybe like your server could crash, or maybe, you could lose some equipment, maybe you could get robbed. There's always some kind of unforeseen risk when doing a business, and it's not necessarily unique to the tech. The tech industry is constant in all industries. So the general advice is to not put all your eggs in one basket. So make sure that you have a nest egg somewhere else, so that if something fails, you have something to fall back on, right? But if you put all your eggs in one basket, if that fails, then you have nothing left. So just try and at least have some savings, perhaps, and try and spread out your investment. Have a way out of every circumstance, so that if things don't go well, then you're not completely finished. But that's just, yeah, some people don't do that and they still succeed. Well, in general, it's better to have an alternative. That's what I realized. Okay, so what percentage of resource should you use in the initial stage? I mean, it depends, but it definitely shouldn't be 100%. I would start out with like maybe 10%. That's an estimate, but it should be something that is very small, but then it should kind of exponentially increase as time goes on. So think of it like planting a tree, right? When you plant a tree, it starts out as a seed, right? And as time goes on, it can become a mighty tree. So the wisdom in that is that you start out with something small, right? And then as you get positive feedback, then you can now pour in more resources to it, right? And the good thing about starting small is that you can actually start multiple things small, right? You can plant multiple seeds and then see which one actually works. Because a lot of times, the truth is that the vast majority of our ideas are false, right? There's only a few ideas that are actually worth working on. But if you start small, then you can test multiple ideas at the same time. And then the ones that are more promising, you can now focus more resources in those ideas as time goes on. So does that make sense? Thank you.
All right. So can you address or say something about tools one can use to quickly get an MVP up that is will be cost efficient and not you don't have to spend too much?
Okay. Yeah, like I guess vibe coding, right? Or you could use like tools like WordPress for websites. There are a lot of no coding tools that you could use. But obviously, as time goes on, you want to use more higher quality tools. You want to actually create a good product. When initially, yeah, you might use like vibe coding or no code drag and drop tools for websites or even apps. Or you could just like create like a product. So like in the example of Bill Gates, he didn't even create anything. He just kind of did a presentation of his idea to his potential investors and they kind of pre-ordered it. So you can do that as well. So just the idea is that you want to just make sure that people actually want to use your product before you start working on it without wasting so much resources. Right. And it's not just based on words, it's based on, like real action, like actually purchasing or pre-ordering or, or using the product to do things of that nature. So someone asks, there are some ideas that might not be feasible in Nigeria, but it works overseas. For someone with ideas like that, what would you advise such a person? Yeah, if you're in Nigeria, but your idea might not work overseas, then I advise that the good thing that we live in a global village nowadays. So with the internet, you can pretty much be in any country. So you can look for people perhaps overseas that you can collaborate with, or maybe there are companies. There are ways of going around this. There are ways of collaborating with people overseas, or even like there are people in Nigeria that have registered their companies in America. So there are ways of doing that. So just have to research, talk to people, talk to various people. I guess this is where paying your tithe comes in. So as you talk to more people, yeah, you can actually get this kind of information from them. But if you're all to yourself, you're just working on your own, then you might not necessarily know that there's a way to leverage certain resources that you have. So just make sure you network, you collaborate with people, and then you get this kind of ideas.
Yes, I'm going to ask this question. Please, I would also like you to clarify. In case in this kind of business now, is it possible for me to like trying to collaborate with people overseas? It might be some kind of idea feeling like if I'm not that kind of competent to meet with the requirement or what they need. So can there be just some kind of thing?
Okay, you said they're afraid that they might not necessarily be competent people you collaborate with. Is that what you're saying?
Like myself, maybe I'm not that competent to handle things that,
Okay, you might not be that competent. Oh, yeah. So I guess if you're not very competent, then you might want to set aside some time to learn. Maybe just work under people. So rather than, saying that you want to do a startup, just work with people, maybe look for a mentor, or maybe work on, free products. If what you're working on is not necessarily a startup, then you might have the opportunity to learn with time. And then when you're ready, you can now work on the startup. So just take time to learn and get the skills you need to succeed. All right. Thanks everyone. This was a very nice session. Thank you for all the very interesting questions. I hope everyone gained something from this. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you to you too, Oluchukwu. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. And thank you to everyone who showed up. So the whole idea of this was to take an hour to hear from someone else beyond the thoughts in our head and our immediate circle, to see what their thought is on how we could move our ideas to MVP, or turning it into a real product, or collaborate, or find other means to just getting our ideas out, just not just thoughts in our head or things we just share with friends and it dies there. So one big lesson here, from just like starting with the last thing he said, is take time to learn. So just in case you are here or you participated in this and you really want to start something in the future, or immediately you do not have the skill, you do not even have the resources to get started, or you don't have the people on ground. If you have anybody connected to this meeting, I believe you have enough resources to start learning some basic skills. What I mean by that is you have either connected to this through a laptop or a smartphone. That means you have access to internet, you have access to YouTube. So from there is to know what you want and then kick off, start learning some basic things while you progress. And he also highlighted the importance of a mentor. Mentorship shortens the route, because a mentor could help give you some simple roadmaps to follow. So you're not running based on guesswork. You have a body of ideas through somebody else's experience at your disposal. Then networking is a thing that's I always say something like, no matter how great or amazing your cake is, if you're a caterer, if nobody knows about it, it's almost like you don't have anything. So if you have something, put it out there, build the right network, move out of your comfort zone, go beyond your immediate environment. There's a whole lot of resources out there. And from the comfort of our home, with the help of technology, you can connect to people. For example, I'm in Bonny Island. I have a team in Lagos that if I need some certain level of help or support, I could just reach out, just a WhatsApp or Slack conversation, and an idea kickstarts or a project gets started. There are other, I also have some friends here who have some other teams out there. Just as for these people who've never, even the speaker we've not met physically before, somebody met him, and I have a network with the person connected him to me through WhatsApp. This whole conversation started. So let's learn to leverage the networks out there. People are willing to support, to contribute, because it's all about building solutions. Like another key word he used that I wrote down, is focus on helping people. Your product should be about helping people. Another word is solving problems. So it's one of the teams I work with in Lagos will always say, love Africa, love the people, and build product out of love. So the products we are building, the solutions we are trying to bring to Nigeria, to Africa, should be as a result of our passion, our love for our community, for our society, for our nation, to see it become better, to be able to compete or even stand out there, be recognized as one of the top nations out there. We could be that light. That's what this was or is all about. And I want to say thank you again for participating, and thank you, Oluchukwu, for your for making out the time to be here. Just before we go, I would like to say again, does anybody else have a contribution or you want to show an appreciation? Okay, let me do this. Yeah, if you want to show appreciation, maybe a shout out to the speaker or someone else in, that you know here, or you want to connect with someone, this is the moment you can reach out, get somebody's email or something to reach out, just in case you want to have a conversation later. So that is possible. So the next 1 minute in for conclusions. Does anybody want to connect with anyone, ask a question, ask for an email? I believe that is possible. Thank you. All right, it seems we are okay, or we have contact with each other already, and we can always reach out to each other some way, somehow, and we've learned, I believe, we plan to be. So once again, thank you so much for your time. The next phase of this conversation on these product development or MVP series, once we are ready for the next version, we will also reach out so we connect and know how to progress from, okay, now I have an MVP, what's next? We will probably talk about team building, how do you build a team around your idea, and so on. So thank you so much once again. This is Cedars Productivity Center. We love you all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.